Hello and welcome back to my channel where we talk about healing from deep emotional wounds, especially those rooted in trauma, childhood wounds, and narcissistic abuse. Today I want to talk about something that I feel like doesn't always get enough attention, and that's father wounds. I know we talk a lot about parental wounds and inner child healing and all of these things, but with Father's Day coming up, which I'm hoping to release this on Father's Day, maybe it might be a day or two late, but I feel like we don't always focus on father wounds themselves. We always say that we have like father issues and a lot of things stem from that, but I don't feel like we always dive into what the father wound actually is and what it looks like and how it appears in our lives in the really, really specific ways. So today I want to dive into that, kind of get into that a little bit deeper and how you can start healing that wound in your everyday life. If this is something that interests you, I invite you to subscribe. I talk about healing every week. There's always something to learn over here. We are constantly healing every single day. So if that interests you, please subscribe, like, and stick around. I would love to have you along on this journey. I feel like father wounds are always looked at as people who had abusive and absent fathers, which yes, that absolutely is true for a lot of, if not most of the cases. But you could have a very positive, healthy father figure in your life and still have father wounds there and not even realize it. It's really important to know that a father wound isn't just about abuse, but it's about what you needed as a child that you didn't get. Because even though sometimes your dad might have done the best that he could and been an excellent father, he's not a mind reader. Parents don't know 100% what to do. So he might not have known what you needed at the time, even if it was like the right thing to say after your baseball game, or the right time to give you a hug, or the right words of encouragement. They don't always know what you needed. So doing that inner child work to really heal that father wound is super important. And obviously those of us who did go through traumatic experiences with our father, whether it be an absent father or an abusive father, then it's really, really, really important to look into those wounds and to do the work to heal those wounds, because it does play out in severe ways in our adult life. When you have major issues like avoidance issues or attachment issues, those obviously can be from father wounds, but there are other ways that it plays out in your life that you might not realize. One super common example of this is hyper independence. If you're super hyper independent, that is a common side effect of a father wound, because your father likely let you down in a big way as a child, whether it be not showing up the way that you needed him to or abandoning you altogether. When you're hyper independent, that means you've got your own back. You're not going to be let down by a man ever again. And that takes a long time to unlearn. To an extent, it's really good to be independent, right? You need to learn to accept help, and it's okay to need other people, and it's okay to rely on others. You don't need to be hyper independent all the time. But when you learn as a kid that you are going to be let down, that instills in you that you can only rely on yourself. If you don't rely on somebody else, you can't be let down. Right? That's the message that you instill in your young self's brain. And when you grow up thinking that, then you're going to be independent for the rest of your life. Hyper-independence is a defense mechanism. The I don't need anyone really translates to I can't be let down again, especially by a man I needed. This often plays out in relationships. When you needed the man as a child, the man being your father, then in relationships, if you're a woman needing a man, you're not going to, be able to ask him for things. I know for me in relationships, I felt guilty letting men pay for things, or accepting like nice gifts, or accepting even a coffee. Things like this were really, really difficult for me. Another symptom is having low self-esteem. If you had a father who just didn't give you the attention that you wanted as a child, or again wasn't there, or constantly blamed you, or for whatever reason you have that father wound, you're going to grow up not feeling good enough because you didn't feel good enough as a child. So therefore, your self-esteem is going to be very, very low. And I know this one firsthand. I had low self-esteem for my entire life. So obviously I've overcome this now, but when you feel like you weren't enough to keep your father's attention or keep your father around, if you weren't enough to keep him in your life, growing up, you're going to feel like you're not good enough to keep any man in your life, or any woman in your life, or anybody in your life. When it comes to dating, you're going to always be searching for the one, and you feel like you're never going to be able to find it. That thirst to find that perfect person, you're never going to be able to satiate it, because you never really experienced love as a child, that true, actual love as a kid in pure form. so you can't experience it as an adult. And this is especially true if you watched your parents go through multiple marriages and multiple divorces. And that's why you see, kids who watch their parents have multiple marriages and divorces. The statistics are much higher for them to grow up and have multiple marriages and divorces as well. Another issue that people with father wounds tend to have is setting boundaries. So if your father was very in and out of your life, sometimes there, sometimes not, sometimes showed up to your sporting events or, school events and sometimes didn't, you're going to be very lenient with people showing up for you in your adult life, and you're not going to have an easy time when it comes to setting a boundary with people because you were very lenient with your father because you had no choice but to be. Setting boundaries is going to be very difficult for you as an adult. And on the other hand of that, if your father was a very strict person and very timely and you weren't allowed to be late and you had to be on a strict schedule, you might mirror that as an adult, and you don't tolerate people being late, and you might be very, very punctual. A very common theme with people who have father wounds is seeking validation and attention, whether your father was there or whether your father was absent or whether your father was abusive. From all of your partners and all of your friends and anybody in any room, you will constantly see that the same problem is that people are seeking the validation that they didn't receive as a child. And even when you do get that hit of dopamine from receiving validation, it's never enough, and you're constantly seeking that little bit of dopamine, whether it's from people pleasing, which is another common theme of people with this wound, or trying to dress really, really nicely to get compliments, or being an overachiever, whatever it may be. Getting that validation is a very common thing. Another super common thing is struggling with depression, anxiety, and or anger. A lot of these are bundled together. Either way, struggling to grasp your emotions and have them regulated. And this is because when you were a kid, you would see other kids' parents, other kids' fathers giving them the unconditional love that a child is supposed to receive from their parents. But when you don't receive that, you're battling these really intense emotions at a really young age, and that gives you fluctuations of emotions that you shouldn't have to deal with. So you grow up already on this roller coaster, and bringing that into adulthood, you weren't taught the proper way to handle these, because you shouldn't be dealing with these that intensely at a young age. And odds are you don't understand when you're that young why you're so angry. You don't want to tell people you're so angry because you don't want to say, well, I'm jealous that your dad is loving you. Most kids don't say that. So you're growing up bottling a lot of these emotions in. And then when you get to adulthood, you've been bottling these emotions in for decades at this point. So then you have emotions that have turned to bitterness and resentfulness and anger and depression. And that can be really hard to sort out as an adult. People with father wounds also tend to pick partners exactly like their father. I have talked about this in many videos, and the science behind this is actually really interesting. Your nervous system craves what's familiar, and when you grow up either with an abusive father or a very strict father or an absent father or whatever the father wounds that you have, when you grow up with that type of father, your nervous system finds that normal. So then as an adult, if you were to date somebody who's not like that, you're not going to be comfortable in that relationship because it's not normal to your nervous system. But if you're to date somebody who does, exhibit those behaviors, you're going to be comfortable in that, even if it means it's toxic, even if it's abusive, even if it's not safe, even if it's on paper not a good, healthy relationship. Another end to this is certain scenarios, your inner child is still trying to play out and finish and get the end result that you wanted. So let's say that, you never got that love from your father that you wanted. If you pick a partner who's similar to your father, you're still going to do the things to try to earn their love. I know I experienced this firsthand. Obviously, I wasn't intentionally doing this. I learned this after I was safely out of this relationship, and I could see what I was doing in hindsight. But your inner child and your subconscious is trying to play that relationship out. Like, your inner child was like, it's not fair. I never got what I wanted in my childhood. My childhood could have been so much better had my father just loved me, had my father just been there, had my father just given me the things that I deserved to have as a child. So you're going to find a relationship with somebody who is like your father. If your father was an alcoholic and abusive, you're going to seek out somebody subconsciously who is an alcoholic and abusive so that you can try to fix them subconsciously so that they will love you and give you the life that you deserved to have as a kid, even though it's never going to happen. You can't fix them, you can't make them be that person, but that's what your nervous system is doing. What's interesting is with a father wound, you're not really grieving a father. You're not grieving a person. You're not grieving your dad. You're grieving the person that you wanted him to be. And this is the same for relationships. You know, when you're grieving the relationship after it ended, you don't miss the partner, you miss the idea of the partner that you wanted. We mourn the version of the dad that we wanted. And I know I had always struggled with this, specifically for me personally, because for the biggest portion of my childhood, my dad was in prison. So my relationship with him was strictly on paper. We never went and visited him. So the relationship I had with him was writing back and forth. So he made me all these false promises and he acted like he was this person. So I had this vision in my head of who he was. And so when he got out of prison and wasn't that person, I never got over that. I never I couldn't come to terms with him not being who he was on paper. I couldn't come to terms with him not being that person. I had to mourn that, and I didn't. It took me getting hurt by him again and again and again to finally come to terms with, okay, he's not that person. Who I wanted him to be and who he actually was were two different people. And I had to get over the fact that he was never going to be the dad that I needed and wanted and deserved. I know that I deserved to have a certain dad, and I know I didn't deserve the abuse that I went through from him. Letting go of that illusion is incredibly painful, but it's so freeing. It helps you so much in your healing process when you're able to let go of that illusion of them being a specific person, because that is the biggest thing tying you down to what's hurting you, the pain of that father wound, the illusion you have in your mind of who they could have been. And if you have a healthy relationship with your father, or you had a healthy father as a kid and you still have some father wounds there, that's okay. You can still love your father. You can still have a good relationship with him and acknowledge your father wounds. Healing doesn't mean you hate your dad. Healing means you love yourself enough to heal those wounds so you can have a better relationship with your dad, if anything else. Healing means feeling what needs to be felt and closing that chapter in moving forward. Another thing people don't talk about a lot is if your father was mean or cruel or abusive to your mother. This is emotional enmeshment. This is when your mother's pain becomes your pain. When you absorb her grief or anger or sadness that she received from the things that she went through from your father. You might have felt responsible for her sadness or her anger, or you might have learned not to trust or not to love. You might have inherited this wound from her. You didn't experience it directly, but you inherited it from her, from what she went through. And you can still heal this wound. Just because you didn't go through it doesn't mean you can't heal it. I'll say my father and I do not talk. We have not talked in a long time, but I have healed my father wound. I won't say it's completely healed, because I don't think anybody's ever completely healed. And I think that I will say that a lot of my childhood, I'm still remembering and still recalling things that I didn't remember. So that means I'm still healing all the time. I am in a good place with everything that I've gone through as a kid and the things that I do remember. Just because, who am I, right? You're listening to some random girl on the internet. My dad was and is an alcoholic and, had a problem with drugs. As far as I know, he still is. I, again, don't really talk to him. When I was 5, he went to prison. Prior to that, he was very abusive to us. And I do have some memories of that. He went to prison for killing someone drunk driving. And I do remember going to court for his sentencing. I remember, what I wore. I remember everything for that. And like I had mentioned, I wrote to him all the time. I remember, he would write me telling me he was going to take me to Disney World, and I've never been to Disney World. He never took us, but he got out when I was like 14, and he kind of just went right back to his old ways. I seen him a little bit. I think I seen him once or twice when he got out, and then I went a few years without seeing him. And I don't know what went on between him and my mom, but I know that I didn't see him for a few years. Years later, he did reach out and try and have a relationship with me, but he really hadn't changed. And sad because I really don't know much about my dad. I really don't. My relationship with him has been not great. Anytime I've talked to him, it feels like I'm talking to a stranger. I don't know him. But I know that every time that I do breath work, I, have more stuff come up that I remember from when I was really young. I have a lot of trauma that I'm working through, and that's okay. There are a few times that I've seen him between when I was 14 and 21, and he was just getting drunk the whole time, get into a fight with his girlfriend, and she would call me, and they would be, whatever girlfriend he had at the time. He'd always have a new girlfriend, and they, it was always toxic, and it was always bad, and he just was making really bad choices. The last time that I saw my dad was, I think, my brother's funeral in 2020. I didn't realize that every relationship that I had was exactly like my father. I always hated my dad and wanted nothing to do with him after I turned 16. But they all were. They were all abusive. They all had substance abuse issues. They all were, emotionally unavailable. They all took advantage of my kindness. They all had narcissist tendencies. They all were the same type of relationships. And that's because I had a father wound that was unhealed. I was always trying to prove I was good enough. I was always trying to earn love. I was always trying to be good enough to have somebody stay in my life. And that wound just needed to be recognized and brought to the surface and healed. And I just needed to love myself enough to recognize it. But what's important to recognize is healing your father wound isn't about blaming your father. It's about reclaiming your voice and recognizing what you went through as a child. It's your experience. It's not blaming anybody, but knowing what you went through and recognizing yourself as a person. A few things you can do is you can write a letter to your father. You don't have to give it to him. You don't have to send it to him. You can rip it up, burn it, whatever. But write a letter about how you feel, what you went through, what wasn't fair, what he should have done. Do your inner child meditations. They're so important. People rag on them, but they're so important. Mirror work is also so important. It can be super beneficial. Remind yourself who you are now and how strong you are and how far you've come without your father if he was absent. Also set boundaries with men who remind you of that wound. That's really important as well, and that's something that I've actually recently had to learn to implement into my life. And know the difference between forgiveness and access. Just because you forgive somebody doesn't mean that you have to allow them access to your life, access to your children, access to your home, access to you. You can forgive somebody and keep them at a distance if that's what's best for you. Forgiveness does not mean you're obligated to give them access to you. If you're struggling this Father's Day, you're not weak. It's hard for a lot of people. You're human and you're healing from something that you should never have had to carry. I see you and I hear you, and this wound does not have to carry with you for the rest of your life. I promise. You just have to do the work to heal it, and it starts with one day. It can start with one meditation, one letter, one affirmation. It just starts with one step that starts with you. And if you're a father watching this, it's not too late to show up, to take accountability, to take that first step. Your presence and your healing matter too. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to watch this. I hope you got something out of this today. If you did, please give it a like. Please stick around, watch some of my other videos. I have some other ones on parental wounds that if you liked this one, you might like those as well. Other than that, I will see you in the next one. Bye.